You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Home Field Apparel.
Saw the games,
physical basketball
and I was at the games.
versus
You were
physical
not.
fouling.
You watched them on YouTube.
Anyway.
I saw the games. I watched the games.
Well, we're here again. I'm Bob Moats. Welcome to X's and Joes, a podcast dedicated to decoding the winning formula in college basketball.
And I'm Mike Wiemuth, welcoming you to episode 23 and a half. IU basketball's current position. We've seen this road before. It always leads us here. Recorded on the snowy Philadelphia morning of Sunday, January 19th, 2025. So, Robert, I guess a little bit of an audible today, right?
It was one of those things where the events of the last 2 weeks, and again, where were we 2 weeks ago?
We were here in Philly.
I was here. Appreciate again your hospitality and spending a couple days with you and your family, and you got to spend time with some of my family as well.
Yes, that's
right.
Came
over from East Windsor.
People.
Yeah. Trudging around Valley Forge in snow, and then eventually the culminating event of heading to the Palestra for which, if you haven't ever been, and I've heard so many fans say it's on my bucket list. Put that up over going to see the pyramids of Giza. Put it up over going to see the largest ball of twine in Boise, Idaho. Whatever your whatever you think, whatever the family, the Chevy Chase vacation that you want to take to go see is, skip it. Go to the Palestra. It was funny. I was watching a YouTube about the 1960 Eagles thing, and I saw the Palestra in the background of Franklin Field. I go, I've been there.
Yeah, they're right next to each other.
They're right next to each other, and so I felt like I was walking on hallowed sports ground the whole day.
Well, you think of the Palestra it's basically a museum that just happens to have an old-timey basketball court in the middle of it. It is a great place. They have so much history there, not just like basketball, but concerts and all sorts of other political rallies. It's really a great museum piece, and they've done so much renovation out in the sort of concourse area, where they basically turned it into just like a 360 museum.
They have. It's amazing. Yeah, just amazing pieces. And I was talking to a high school basketball coach out there because I got snowed. The snow in Indiana got obviously got to Indiana quicker before it got to Philly. And Mike dropped me off to a hotel, and so I was talking. I ended up going out to grab a drink and a cigar someplace, and talking to a high school coach, and he compared a lot. Like, if you've been to Hinkle and going to the Palestra, there's a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences too between the two of them. And he was mentioning he was out at he had been at Hinkle because he had a kind of a link with Thad Matta, years ago. So there's some of this sort of thing that as you kind of talk about, it's amazing. But not just going to the Palestra, but there's not a bad seat in the house, I don't think.
No. And
we had amazing seats.
Yeah, it's amazing to be at a place where literally you can be at the worst seat and you still see everything. And it's something else. They really haven't changed anything in terms of design. Even the bathrooms have not been changed since the 1920s. So it's you have to expect there to be like a memorial plaque over top of certain urinals there. I just imagine Tom Gola used this urinal the night he scored 60 against St. Joe's in 1954, something like that.
Jimmy Breslin's favorite pisser. You can just seeing that one as a possibility.
Yeah, exactly. The whole place is a museum piece, and it's definitely someplace that I think every basketball fan should come to see, as you said.
And especially going on a game where it's really, really good, where your team puts on, I would say, a really good performance. And I know that the Hoosiers were stoked after that. That first segment of the second half, very similar to maybe a couple of the segments we saw against Ohio State.
Yeah.
They came out and they were rolling. Mackenzie Mbako was rolling, hitting shots. Miles Rice was an amazing steal right in front, literally right in front of us. Yeah. And you kind of just saw Indiana was able to. You saw what it looked like when they looked good. I'll put it that way.
Right.
And you saw just how they can play if they play together in a certain way. If they can do that for 40 minutes, there's a lot. We knew there was a lot of talent, but we could see how it could come together. Mm-hmm. Then the snow came. Then I eventually got back to Indiana. Minus one jacket to the guy at Logan Airport who now has my nice Under Armour jacket. I hope you enjoy it.
I'm sure when he picked it up, he said, this is wicked. Wicked comfy.
Yeah.
You'll take this to Boston. Take this to Boston Harbor.
The longshoreman. It's like, but no, here we were. But then we had the USC game, and then the back-to-back 25-point-ish losses.
Yeah. One
on the road to Fran at Iowa, the other on at Assembly Hall against Illinois.
Yeah. I think you and I were going back and forth trying to find the right military metaphors for that first half of the Illinois game.
When you realize that Dunkirk and the Hindenburg both don't necessarily jive, like you think that's just not bad enough.
You have to almost do like some kind of combination. It's like Pickett's charge on top of the bombing of Dresden inside of Gallipoli.
Yeah. And I mean, the game itself was bad, and the visuals were worse, which is, I think, the inspiration for why we feel like we need to have this conversation at 23-5. Like, we could have the expectations conversation right now and backdoor our way into the conversation with Jared. We could do that.
Yeah.
But it almost feels like we need to kind of go on a direct route for this moment. Yeah. And, it's funny because 2 weeks ago it was snowing like it is kind of now in both of our locations. Mm-hmm. And that snow has yet to melt. So that just tells you in the last 2 weeks how things how again, as you said, I think Harold McMillan once said,
events, dear boy, events.
And here we are. It's and here we are again. So before we get cracking on this, let's go ahead and thank our title sponsor, Home Field Apparel.
Yep.
Valentine's Day is coming up, Mike, and I think you and I have both been married long enough. What do you do?
Yeah. Well, I would put homefieldapparel.com at the top, just because I think for a lot of people that may have not bought from Home Field Apparel may prioritize it this year, just because the huge expansion of all the schools that they've had over the last, since last Valentine's Day.
Right.
Very impressive. And everyone has a favorite team somewhere, or they know somebody in their family that has a favorite team. So it's definitely a good reservoir of options for. And
sometimes it just looks cute,
Right.
Sometimes you can get a shirt that just, oh boy, I like the mascot, or you're watching a game and you and your significant other are sitting there and oh yeah, that's really, I really like their floor design. And so, kind of getting that shirt, or a hat from those areas. Plus, I mean, your significant other always asks for shopping from you. Just send them to Home Field and give them some ideas. And if you're like me, my wife dresses me anyway. So, I mean, I can't be trusted on my own fashion sense. I walk out of here with, if I could get away with it, I walk out here in Crocs and shorts every day with a Hawaiian shirt. So, it's, we try.
You're the Big Lebowski of Columbia.
I might. Actually, I think we know who the Big Lebowski is. I think his name Taylor. I mean, Taylor may be the Big Lebowski. I just had that thought where it's like I see pictures, I'm going, man, he looks like him. But anyway,
Florida, but not California, but same thing.
Florida, but close enough. Yeah. But so I say, forget the flowers, forget the chocolates, forget the jewelry. Don't go to Home Field for Valentine's Day.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm still waiting for home field to add Cornell, so I can grab Loy and some gear. So that's on my like wish list. But I know that licensing stuff is always complicated. So
it can be, and I feel the same way about Marion. I think because that would be one for my wife. Exactly. So www.homefieldapparel.com and check out what they've got.
Yep. All right. And when we come back, we'll jump right into the fun, or the, let's say, not so much fun, on Indiana's current situation and what it all means, next on X's and Joe's.
So with every mistake, surely we must be learning, and still our guitar gently weeps. It's
thanks, George.
Yeah, I mean, we as I was kind of thinking about this, Galen has talked about time being flat with us before, that things just kind of happen, and I think as you've studied this more in depth, probably more than anybody else I've known or run into, how coaching tenures work. We're kind of used, you're kind of used to this, where it's almost like you take your favorite Halloween character, the Grim Reaper, and you're able to kind of see it a certain way.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with the idea that with every mistake, it's also like, you look at every coach has series of missteps or a calculated gamble that didn't pay off one way or the other. To be successful in a field where 2/3 of your peers are in there are 4 years or less. In the Big Ten, it's a little better. I think 1/3 of the coaches are in that window of 4 years or less, Mike Woodson being one of them.
Right.
But how fan bases respond, how the internals of college basketball and sports, including the media, responds, how players respond in these types of situations.
Right.
And, I think sometimes for me, what's always been interesting about the whole Mike Woodson thing was it was not, and we talked about this at the beginning. You and I did before we had this, the show, and it's like when we kind of tried to break down what's actually going on here.
Yeah.
This was always a unique hire in that it's not going to be the traditional, okay, you're going to get 4 years to get your guys in here, and then the honeymoon phase, you're going to have this is a shotgun wedding honeymoon. It was going to be, the expectation is going to be to do two things simultaneously. One, win now with Archie Miller's recruits.
Yeah.
Basically, Mike Woodson was hired to finish out Archie Miller's contract.
Right. That's a good metaphor. Yeah, it's a good analogy. Yeah.
That he was not, and whether, I'm not saying that was what was negotiated. I'm not saying that's what, but functionally, when you look at this hire was meant for Mike Woodson to come in and take Trace Jackson Davis, Race Thompson, Rob Finnessy, Trey Galloway, Anthony Leal, at that time, Christian Lander. You look at that nucleus, a roster that in 2020 would have made the NCAA tournament had COVID not happened, and then promptly just did a nosedive right square into the earth in 2021.
Right.
And when Archie Miller was and that was a year with no fans, and the one time we had fans, the booing started and Archie was untenable.
Yeah.
And the day after Selection Sunday, I'm driving back from Nebraska, and the announcement comes over that, okay, we're moving on.
Yeah.
I think it surprised a bunch of us, but because he had built a decent roster.
Yeah.
And they bring in Mike Woodson after a fairly unconventional coaching search. I think we could both agree.
Sure. Yeah, it was obviously focused on one unicorn shot, and then once that shot missed, then everything kind of centered on the backup plan.
And you get a guy that there were a lot of forces and a lot of factors that we're not going to hit right now. That's for a later time.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, it was you're going to get a guy who needs to win, who can show who can come in here and just coach this team, and then simultaneously pivot to. He's going to have to do two things at once. He's going to have to win with what he has, as well as bolstering that, which he did incredibly well in the transfer portal his first couple of years. He's always done really well in the transfer portal. You can say that.
Right. Yeah.
And then the second part of this is, and then basically let's get Indiana back to a point where they can recruit at the higher levels. I think we've heard the term bridge hire a lot. Yeah. That this was always designed to be a bridge hire. The question is it a bridge too far? Is it the bridge over the River Kwai? Yeah. Is it London Bridge? What's the bridge going to look like? And I think in this situation, we're at the point where we're looking at the bridge and we're saying, okay, this is, as we're sitting here in January 19th of year 4, where does it take us? Yeah. And I think that the defining the job, what really happened was he had, I would say, 2 pretty good years to start.
Yeah, he had where he was at the end of year 2. I would say, yeah, the trajectory at least was at least within the parameters of what you see successful coaches having that stay at their school beyond like year 4 in the first 2 years.
And year 3 was going to be a regression. Year 3 was Archie Miller's actual regression. Had Archie Miller worked out, that would have been his regression year.
Probably, yeah.
And that also accounts for the COVID year where we got a bunch of guys got an extra year.
Yeah.
So, but the regression wasn't supposed to go from a 4 seed to smack dab in the middle of the 4th tier of college basketball.
Right. Yeah. It was the dreaded 50 plus Ken Palm drop that I had written about before.
Now Mick Cronin had one too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the problem that you had, and this is what I wrote about before, when it comes to making that huge a drop off, when it happens, obviously matters a lot, right? Like if it happens like in year 2, typically it's not usually as damaging. I mean, there's been some successful coaches had it then. If you have it in like year 6 or 7, after you've had some success, after you've maybe gone to, Final 4, maybe had an AP top 5-ish finish and your recruiting is like, spiking up, then you have kind of a regression, doesn't matter as much. For some reason, I'm still trying to explain it. In the data, year 3 having a big regression just seems to just kill a lot of coaches. When it's a big drop off, added with recruiting regressing at that same time, plus being at like a basketball school, those factors all kind of mixing together. That was kind of hit Chris Mack, and it definitely seems to have hit Woody the same way. So,
well, and there's also, I think, looking at it from the standpoint that, again, non-traditional sort of situation, because Archie Miller year 5 was Mike Woodson year 1, and then you would assume that there would be a year 6, a year 7. So with those 2 years, that's where the simultaneous piece comes in. That you're supposed to, at the same time you're building here.
Yeah.
You need to have a second push here.
Right.
And you can argue he was doing it.
Yeah.
You can argue that with what he had brought in, what was coming in. You had Trey Galloway, you had Tamar Bates comes in as one of those short-term recruitments.
Yeah.
Along with Malik Renew.
Jalen
yeah, exactly. And the point with Jalen Hood-Schifino is, regardless of what you believe as to, well, did he really surprise them by being a lottery pick, or an NBA first round draft pick after 1 year, or one and done, or was it kind of known? I think we were talking about him being a probable one and done before he ever stepped on the floor for a game.
I thought it was at least a 50% chance when he came in.
So you at least need to hedge your bet, especially with Xavier Johnson. At that point, we don't know he's going to be injured. You would probably need a second guard to be back there with him. Even if he stuck around for a sophomore, you're going to need a replacement for Xavier.
Right. Right. Yeah. And if you think about it, it's like you said, the continuation part is always the problem in these cases. Most college coaches, when you look at the data, um, most of them get a bump during the honeymoon in terms of recruiting and all that. Like I've said before, it's the difference between being in a weightless environment versus a heavy gravity environment, the honeymoon versus the post honeymoon. You are able to recruit kids and get usually a hit rate on your recruits that is much easier in those first like 12 to 18 to 24 months than it is later on, unless you have like success that allows you to have that increased recruiting after the honeymoon's over. So Woody got that because he signed Renew and Hood Schifino within like a 6-month period of each other, and he got Tamar Bates. So it's 3 top 30-ish recruits in about a 6-month period. If you do that ongoing in terms of your hit rate in high school for that type of recruit, and then you add on top of it, a pretty substantial fill-in of talent from the portal, you're probably, in terms of probabilities, going to be in a pretty good place.
Exactly.
Yeah, but the biggest problem is, again, talking about the continuation, is that it stopped. I posted this statistic the other day on Peegs and some other like social media sites. After Woody signed Jalen Hood Schifino, he went 0 for 31 on top 100 high school guard offers. And you can change the name of the school, change the name of the coach. And if you just handed me that statistic, said, Mike, based upon the history, what happens to schools and coaches when that stat hits them? I would say it would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
I mean, a single digit hit rate for high school guards, like the upper tier high school guards at a high expectation program, would be really damaging. 0% is extra damaging to any coach in that situation.
And I would only counter that bringing it, because I think one of the things that's worth bringing up here is that with Miles Rice and Kanan Carlisle both suiting up, that and then you also have the Bryson Tucker recruitment that happened, that he's not really a guard, but they're going to because they have him listed as a small forward, right?
He's officially a 3, yes.
Yeah. So, but you have so maybe you could look at, if you want to make that case too, where you at least have, you've had some portal and short-term recruiting successes in potentially driver type players.
Yeah. Well,
but
you go ahead with your but. Yeah.
But, and again, it's because there will be that case of, well, that way of doing things, Mike, is over. It's done. We can't do, you can't rely on high school recruiting anymore. It's like someone in the 80s in baseball saying, well, you can't, your farm system doesn't matter where you can make trades and you can get free agency. It's the same type of thing.
Yeah.
But I would say the but here is you were still investing. It would be one thing. It was 0 for 3. It was 0 for what, 36, and that was on offers, right?
0 for 31.
31. Okay. 0 for 31 in offers, right?
Offer hit rates on top 100 high school guards. So
you still were making entrance. You're trying to get out to talk to 31 kids. You'd think after Jalen Hood Schifino was at an IU uniform, you would think maybe there would be something there that would say at least one of them should say yes.
Yeah.
What did you think? I mean,
probability.
And again, some of it also was, and again, we look at how this program recruited, how this program did things, how this program continues to be a part of the how it functions. Yes, there was a time and a place to try something different, but clearly going into year 4. That wasn't working.
Right. Yeah. And Yeah, it's hard just because, like you said, it's what we have mentioned before about the ramping up and to exit the honeymoon period is like the pivotal part of the of the survivability of coaches. Um, it is very much like, you're trying to take off in the airplane. You need speed before the end of the runway hits you, and if you don't have enough speed, you sputter when on the takeoff when you're trying to build up enough speed to get out of there. Well, if you sputter, then you're going to crash, and unfortunately, that's what happens to most coaches when they do don't make it past year 4. Yeah, and on the tough thing when it comes to like the sourcing part, we're talking about like high school versus portal. Unfortunately, people tend to get in that mindset that it's an either or, right? We've seen those kind of debates pop up, and even I've been involved in them. And I'm sort of in the middle, just because most of the data that I see tends to demonstrate that balance is really what you need. So I've told people that say the portal is crap that, well, most of the good teams need some portal access to be successful. And the other people that say the portal is everything. High school recruiting is dead. I will tell them that, well, you just look at the numbers and it says otherwise. I mean, I think that argument about high school recruiting being over is logically strange to me. It's like, we always talk about recruiting being compared to the chicken and the egg. If you say that high school recruiting is done and only colleges are going to build up through the portal, that's like saying that there will be no more eggs, only chickens. For kids to get into college, theoretically, they have to be high school recruits first before they actually become portal players. So this is part of the dynamic of, getting to understand, okay, what is like the right balance? And I can't tell you exactly what the right balance is, because every team is going to do a little bit differently. But what we have seen is that you need some kind of balance. And the problem is that when IU under Woody basically got locked out of, the sort of like the pools of talent for high school, it's like basically tying one hand behind your back in a boxing match with a competitor that has both hands available to them. If you have the portal and high school talent available to you, then obviously you can pull from much wider angle of player types, of skill sets.
Like Dan Hurley.
Exactly. Yeah. And a lot of the other good coaches out there.
Yeah.
They're going to Final Fours and such. If you only have one talent pool available to you, whether it's you have just high school or just the portal, then you're not competing on the same playing field as those coaches that have access to both. And that's the problem. It's not whether the portal is better or high school is better, is that you need both to widen the field for you.
And that's the whole, I guess the point here is that when you start looking at this, when we look at kind of the whole roster construction conversation that we've had really since the beginning of the Woodson era, and the issue with size, I think, where you try to where I think that IU is trying to outsize their opponents more times than not.
Right.
When they're on the floor, how they're using length, the length that they're bringing in, the questions that we keep going back here, because things away from this program, when we were going into year 3, and I don't think there were any incoming high school freshmen or high school seniors coming in when Mike Woodson and company decided they were going to when they had to replace Trey Saxon Davis, when they had to replace Jalen Hoods-Schifino, when they had to replace Race Thompson and Miller Kopp.
Yeah.
And then they also lost Tamar Bates and Jordan Geronimo, who were also, and I know Bates definitely was a top 100 player. I thought Geronimo was too.
Geronimo was, he was briefly in the top 80 at one point. He dropped to 120, 150 range. But yeah, I mean,
And also it depends on it also depends on
forward.
the service, because I thought there was one or two services they still kind of said this guy has a lot of upside.
Yeah, Geronimo is one of those recruits that just splits opinion because he has such kind of freakish capabilities in terms of his physicality and his jumping ability, but obviously his skill set is a little bit, let's say, in development. And guys like that are going to, they're going to have a very wide recruiting ranking range.
And so, but you definitely had Tamar Bates, who was somebody who could have, when you think about someone who should have been by his junior year, with a more traditional model, he's on his way to Missouri. Yeah. And then CJ Gunn was supposed to maybe step up into kind of that, seventh or eighth man role.
Yeah.
There were some conversations there. Instead Gabe Cupps gets forced after XJ and Trey both go down with injuries throughout the year, was kind of thrust into a starting role.
Yeah.
And he's again just outside that 100 or right around that 100-ish level.
Yeah.
Would be my understanding. So it wasn't like you were trying to do this with a bunch of guys that were not really guards. You had a few guards in there, but you didn't really have the same look or feel of other programs, because you were trying to play basically 2 4s on the floor together,
right, with
a center, with a post player. Yeah. So that, I think that was kind of, we were still looking at that as kind of let's just see if he can get the player development down. Yeah. So going from year 2 to year 3, you had kind of 2 things happening simultaneously. One was the recruiting just wasn't fully there.
Yeah.
And I think December 1st of last year of 2023, was probably was a time frame where we were kind of everyone. I think that when the red flags really hit, it was right around that time, right in between Christmas and Thanksgiving and Christmas of 2023,
right,
when Boogie Fland said no, Liam McNeely said yes and was still kind of staying in the area, but we know what happens there.
Yeah.
And Derek Queen begins to stretch out his recruitment longer, and then eventually ending up at Maryland.
Yeah.
While
Flory Badinga, Bryson Tiller,
right.
Yeah, Travis Perry, Austin Schwartz, the whole list.
But those guys, IU basically said we're not. They kind of walked away from those guys.
Yeah, exactly. That's also part of the problem is the management of the option Bs.
3 chief targets. Hypothetically, they landed 1.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, the feeling was going into Thanksgiving that they at least had a better than reasonable shot of landing all 3.
Right.
Like you're not going to get rich making that bet on a parlay if you try to parlay those 3.
Yeah.
You'll do well, but you're not going to get rich on it.
Yeah, and it's and that was sort of like the interesting thing about that particular class, because you remember the class before, I guess, would be Woody's second class. Yeah, that was sort of like the Cups, and then later Mbako sort of like came on the tail end, right?
And Newton. Ja'Kai Newton.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, IU lost on some, recruitments like, Jeremy Fears, Reed Shepard, Cohen Carr, they kind of walked away from, which is, we could get, that could be a whole 10-minute conversation right there. We bring some friends in for that one.
Yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do.
And Andre Stojakovic. I mean, there was just a group of players. So they had their second cycle was like, okay, they kind of scraped together some pretty decent players, but it wasn't sort of that, okay, man, they're really hitting at the same rate that they were like the year prior, where they got Hutchefino and Renew. They didn't have that kind of recruiting class. So remember, everything kind of became mortgaging all of the emotional investment into the next year. It's like, oh man, that next class, we're going to kill it. 2024 class is that's going to be the savior class. And you remember I posted online about sometime around that when recruiting season was in full swing, IU had their best rate of official visits in that cycle they'd had in like 15, 20 years. IU had 10 official visits from top 50 recruits in the primary cycle, in the normal sort of not after the cycle is over and just picking up stragglers, like the primary main part of the cycle, IU had 10. I think the prior record before that within that same 15-year period was like 5 or 6, I think. So it was way ahead of where IU had been. The assistants did an excellent job of doing what assistants are supposed to do, which is set the table, get as many OVs. If you get 10, typically you want to get about 3 commits out of that, because again, you're not going to get everybody, obviously. But the reason you get as many official visits as you can is because the math works out that way. It's like, okay, we're not going to get everyone, but if you have many more shots at it, then some of those are going to hit.
Liam
McNeely,
Derek Queen, Boogie Fland.
Yeah.
That's 3.
Yeah.
You see where I'm going?
Exactly.
It all looked good,
yep.
is what I'm saying.
And Bob, what was IU's hit rate on those 10?
In the words of Dean Wormer, eventually 0.0.
Exactly.
Because when Liam McNeely walked away, right?
Yeah.
It was almost like, and that was what, 20. Didn't we do assembly call that night? Was that when we kind of did
we were lucky enough to jump on AC that night with Coach Tonsoni.
And that's the infamous drinking episode, and
we did have some libations that night, I remember.
and I'm going to kind of shift quick on this because I think that because I think we need to kind of go through on court what was going on. Was that you had a year where, while this is happening on the recruiting area, which is kind of like, I don't know, studying, for a lot of people, like the casual fan, the Facebook fan, the fan that tunes in and just watches parts of the game, or maybe checks their phone the next morning and maybe it's on national television and watches it. They're following the program, but they're not us, thinking like where right. Our wives need to probably pull us away from the computer screen and have interventions with us. Yeah. But in all seriousness, it was a thing where we were looking, I think fans looked at it, was like the product on the court. When Blake Barker from Columbus, Indiana hits a 3-point shot at the end, and I'm thrilled for Blake personally, but I'm going, oh man, that really just that cost us 5 spots in the metric sites.
That was the Army game, right?
The Army game with the United States Military Academy, who was like, I think 30-point predicted win for IU ends up being 6 or 8.
Yeah, it was damaging.
And then you had other games like Florida Gulf Coast. I mean, you had several games during that whole stretch where it was like IU statistically underperformed.
Yeah.
And then they go and they run into, you get buzz cut by UConn. They get buzz cut by the Kansas game was actually good, but there was another game in there as well. Oh, Auburn, that Auburn game where they just were just cut out, just run down.
Yeah.
And you were seeing a style of basketball where they were very post reliant.
Yeah.
They appeared, the ball doesn't move and pop like it does on other programs. You don't have the same ability to drive and penetrate the lane. Right. The shot selection was at times looks forced. I mean, we've talked about offensively where IU is. It feels like sometimes when you watch them play that it's more or less trying to beat the matchup versus trying to make the right read.
Right.
Individuals are being put in position where we have to get the big fellow the ball. We got to get Mac the ball. We got to get this guy the ball. Mm. You didn't really see that against Ohio State because even though Ballo had a great game, you're seeing that Mbako hit the bench for most of the second half, and you saw that they actually found the right decision, the right read out on the court, made the right play, and were able to win in overtime. But in so many of the other games, and especially, even the blowouts, it's like you come out and we saw this at the Palestra. They came ATO, and where was the ball going? Ballo in the post.
Yeah.
When did Penn State get a turnover? ATO, because they basically send over weak side help to basically take out that passing lane and get a strip on it. When we saw, and that was a game they won. And then a couple weeks later, or a week and a half later against Illinois, or no, it was against Iowa. They were blitzing him from other sides, and basically they were able to get, I think, 4 or 5 turnovers early against Ballo in particular.
Yeah,
just because they knew exactly where the ball was going because of how Woodson and company went to start their offense. And so the on the court stuff is a problem too. I think it's because you have both these goals happening simultaneously.
Yeah,
and fans start beginning to notice that there's something not going particular. This is not the trajectory that was where it was on April 1st. It's not the same on January 1st.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like you said, I've always noted the predictability part. Like when you and I will trade messages with, and with some other pals that are followers of basketball. I always note just when a set is being run is like, I know where the ball's going. It's like, I know who's supposed to get the shot here. And I'm almost certain that the other coach, who knows a lot more about basketball even than I do on the on-court stuff, he definitely knows where the ball's going. Because of just the lack of, unfortunately, sort of the lack of variety in some of these plays, especially when it comes to bigs. I mean, think of it, bigs, unless they're like able to shoot from outside, where do they score from? A very small area on the court. Where can guards score from? A very, very wide area on the court. Again, when we talk about like the whole idea of spacing an offense, why is it a guards game? That's a big reason for it. It's just like when you're defending, it's easier to defend a small area than a wide one. And IU is one of the rare schools in college basketball today where for 4 years running, the top scorer on the team is not a 1, a 2, or a 3.
Right.
4 years in a row. Now, if you have Zach Edey, you felt like a once in a generation type of talent. That is like a BPM, 17 plus. A guy that is literally like having a modern day Wilt Chamberlain on your team.
Right.
Just constantly putting up 25 points and, 15 rebounds. You have that guy, then go in the post as much as you can. But if you don't have that guy, then don't do it.
But even then, they also just didn't throw him on a block and say, and IU doesn't do that either with Ballo. They do a lot in movement with them, and I feel like they do that with Ballo, and when Ballo and Renew are both in together, they try to at least get them going downhill, which going from basically from the slots or the wings, to the goal versus. But you still would see, especially early this year, they go out to a 3-2 alignment and trying to run read and react off those sides of things. You even saw it a little bit against Ohio State with more Mbako, more in that sort of secondary, that sort of driving big or shooting big or perimeter big role. And that, but you take the offense, but then you go to the defense, and especially early last year, giving up the sorts of 3-point shooting they were giving up.
Right.
The ball obsession that team seems to take place where, what are we guarding? I think we were talking in Philly. I was like, I'm not really sure what they're trying to do in ball screen coverage.
Right. Yeah. It would seem to vary. Like, okay, are they,
and varied ball screen coverage is fine, but it was hard to recognize exactly what they were trying to accomplish. Were they putting him in drop? Were they putting him in a hedge? Were they trying to switch to peel switch? And there were times where it's like there was one play where Bryson Tucker's yelling at Ballo trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I think the reads on the ball screens are a little bit
or the communication.
Let's say they vary in their effectiveness play to play.
And the communication between, we saw that again, just breakdown plays. And by the way, every team has breakdowns.
Yeah, of course. In the best teams, Auburn has breakdowns. Sure.
So the question is, can you recover?
Right.
And that, and I think that a lot of that on the court thing, as well as just what we would call effort plays, guys being engaged, running the floor. They talk. Somebody call this because most episodes you would hear us talking about that competing.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of times it's the, we talk about the the quantitative stuff. And obviously, fans look at that stuff all the time. And they obviously react to not hitting the team not hitting certain marks, let's say, in terms of wins or where they sit within the the standings in the Big Ten, or what part of the tournament they make, or even if they make the tournament at all. I think fans generally get much more upset about the qualitative stuff. Do I see this team improving? Do I see a sense of direction and purpose? Do I see the players trying? Do I see the players, giving the maximum effort? All that stuff. That's what really pisses fans off. It's not just they're winning X number of games, they're losing Y number of games. It's that stuff.
Or where you're in offensive defensive efficiency. Does anybody really care?
Yeah,
Exactly.
And this is a funny thing, Bob. And I'll ask you this question. And it's not a pointed question necessarily. It's just something I was thinking about last night and preparing for the show. Do you think it's weird that there are two, I would say, persistent narratives that seem to have been playing out with Woodson? I won't say necessarily since he arrived, but it's kind of popped up, I guess, in the last 12, 24 months. And both these things seem to be said by other people, not us. One is that Mike Woodson is doggedly committed to playing a specific style of basketball. And number two, that Mike Woodson's program has no identity.
Yeah.
How does that happen logically? Because you think about all the coaches that we know that are known for being doggedly committed to a system. What's the one thing that's always said about those particular coaches? Oh man, they have such a defined identity.
Yeah.
It's like Bo Ryan, man, you know exactly what he's running.
Swing and pack.
Tony Bennett, I know exactly what he's running. Irrespective, Nate Oates, it doesn't matter the style you're running.
Right.
But the idea that there are coaches that are just absolutely almost ecumenically committed to a specific way of playing basketball. Usually there's an identity. And the odd thing is that those two things I just said about Mike Woodson seem to be operating at the same time, and it doesn't make much sense at all.
Because I'm gonna throw out, I think I've said this. If I have, I apologize for repeating it, but I think it needs to be worth repeated. I think he does have an identity. I think his teams do have an identity.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's defined the way that most people who follow basketball, who coach basketball at any level would define it, because most of us don't dream or cannot live or function in a world where this is even possible for us, let alone one that we would plan for.
Yeah.
When I say beat the matchup, that's how he sees the game.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the Dwayne Wade. I mean, I remember we talked about this a little bit, but Dwayne Wade's comment during the Olympics this year about the international game versus the US NBA game of kind of hierarchical versus versus systemic basketball,
right?
Where there's been and the move is happening in this country, especially in the college ranks, especially in some of the professional ranks, like with guys like Steve Kerr and their offensive concepts. But there's also a backlash to this, which is what I guess what it comes down to is nobody says this guy has to get his shots if you look at it from a systemic approach.
Right.
But if you're thinking hierarchical approach, these are my guys that get the shots. These are my guys that get shots when it makes sense.
Yeah.
These guys rarely ever shoot because we don't want them shooting.
Yeah.
And in the modern game, you have to have five guys. I believe you have to have five guys on the floor, especially at that Division I level. Even I would say high school and above, you have to have five. You have to have five guys on the floor who can at least score it.
To win at a given level. Yes.
The more threats you have, the more the defense has to worry about it.
Right.
Now it's not. Now, I think in so much like when we talk about the sets, when we talk about defensive assignments, when we talk about defensive scheme, all of it goes back to forcing players, basically saying, we're going to make sure our players are better than your players.
Right.
I'm going to be able to coach a thing. I'm going to create a system where I'm going to get this guy a shot here. I'm going to, our system is basically getting the ball and letting this guy make a play.
Yeah.
I'm going to have 5 guys, and even if they can't make a play, I'm going to teach them. I'm going to show them. I got to get them. I got to get them over the hump.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm serious. I think the identity of this group is we're going to win every matchup.
Yeah. Well, and that's a very, very much a construction of the pro game, right?
Well, it is and it isn't.
The old time pro game, not necessarily.
And I can understand that a guy that's 6th all time at IU in scoring is going to say, I want it to look this way. I want my chief players. I want my alphas.
Yeah.
And I'm going to define who those are, because in many respects, Bob Knight did define alphas on his team. He had guys.
Yeah.
Definitely. These are the shooters.
You're the only one shooting threes.
Right. Or Woody, you're the one who's coming off these screens and looking for this. So he sees, and again, it's not to say that he doesn't. It's more of a stylistic question. It's more of a philosophical question.
Yeah.
He also, I don't think he can entertain the idea that it's anything else than this. I don't think he can entertain, I don't think he could entertain the idea of, well, why would you do all this?
Right.
When in reality, don't you want your best guys taking these shots?
Yeah.
And I think he decides who those guys are. And I think he builds a program around getting those guys to points.
Yeah. And I think there are times you've seen in his tenure where I think that actually paid off.
Mm-hmm.
Like you think about that Illinois game.
Oh, yeah.
Champaign, where, I mean, the sort of doggedness of having the sense of my alpha is going to get shots. Trace Jackson Davis just absolutely abused Dane Danger and the whole Illinois front line, because Woody just says, okay, Trace is getting the ball and we're just going to murder them in mid-post actions, right?
Right.
So it does, again, it does work in certain circumstances. And
Jalen Hood-Schiavino versus Purdue.
Exactly.
You're going to drop coverage? Fine. Boom.
And that's even footers all game. Yeah.
And that was mid ranges, and people, and again, that's another knock on the. We're going to talk about 3-point shooting in a future episode, but that knock of the mid range jump shot. But okay, fine, I'll take it to 10 to 12 to 18 feet, and I'm just going to drill it on you because you can't, because Braden Smith can't get through this screen.
And Bob, who is arguably the greatest mid range jump shooter in IU history in the last 40 years?
It's down to 2. 50. It's
50.
50. It's 50 now.
Sorry, I'm getting older.
Mike is 50. Don't remind me. Mike Woodson.
Yep.
You can make, or Scott May. I mean, but who was Mike Woodson in the motion offense going in? He was the replacement for Scott May.
Yep. Yeah. And if people ever want to get a sense, you can just go on YouTube and just put Mike Woodson, Kansas City Kings, or his old NBA files. It is a treasure trove of just a marksman from 16, 17 feet.
And I'm never going to fault a guy that was a doubles hitter in the major leagues for saying, for going to die on that hill.
Yeah.
And again, I think you brought up a good point. It wasn't all bad. There have been some not just moments, but it's probably, I think what's even more frustrating about some of this is the Paradise Lost approach.
Mm-hmm.
Were we positively giddy coming out of that Trace Jackson Davis last year?
Yeah.
I think that was probably the closest we felt. And granted, you had the Mata Fife leaving. Okay, let's let this guy try it his way. Okay, so he's skipping the finals of the IHSAA, and he's just not making an effort. So he said no to Xavier Booker. Maybe that's actually, so he's focused. He's zeroing in. But his reset year of this year, and I think that you have a great slide. Some great the 10 termination factors.
Yeah.
Slide.
Yeah. Yeah, we can bring that up. It's
bring that up because I think this year in particular was, I hate the word get right or comeback year, but it was supposed to be the year that you're supposed to, okay, you get a year to kind of hit a hard reset.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically about not just getting back to the tournament. It's not just about improving your talent acquisition, especially having a good portal haul. It wasn't even just about, getting high school recruit. All of these things kind of had to happen. And like number one is a measurable lack of winning relative to program expectations.
Mm-hmm.
As I'm kind of going through here, a lot of this goes.
Do you want me to just read these out first, and then we can take them one by one, or how do you want to do that?
I'm going to just let's kind of just go through them a little bit.
Yeah,
because
just for our audio only folks, we'll kind of specify. Yeah,
right.
This is 1. This is 2. Yeah, exactly.
You can say you can flex 14-5 right now.
Yeah,
and you can say, well, we have 2 quad 1 wins, but then you can look at your quad 1 losses and the way those happened. And show it's kind of like when Archie Miller in his last year when they played Texas.
Right.
He showed some games that they could win in, but it wasn't against Shaka Smart's Texas team, they were completely outmatched.
Yeah.
And you go to that Louisville game, the Gonzaga game, the Iowa game, the Illinois game, and the Nebraska game, all 5 losses.
Yeah.
It just looked like they were blown off the floor. Nebraska, they were competitive up until the last 10 minutes, and they just got cold. Right. You can make, and not that you can excuse any of it, but it's like, but when all 5 of your losses are just bad losses and bad from not from a standpoint of a team, Mike Woodson, to his credit, beats the teams he's supposed to.
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, yeah. His problem is definitely sort of the upside of the schedule, not the downside. So, yeah.
Yeah. What else would you say with program expectations on winning? And I know we're going to have a whole episode on expectations, but
yeah, we're going to get into program expectations down the road. Hopefully, with Jared on board. When we talk about like the chip stack, in our chip stack episode, and also there's just the chip stack research. I mean, these 10 coaching termination indicators. I mean, this is just an extension of findings that we have from the work I do on like the chip stack research related to coaching tenures that determines, okay, what are the things that say this coach is going to make it and this coach won't. So, I mean, in my time researching the tenures, like I've tried to isolate indicators that basically are most predictive in terms of saying, okay, yeah, this coach after the 4 years, 5 years, whatever, will probably get an extension or they won't. They're going to be let go. And so if I had to boil down the 10 indicators I see in the research to a simple top 10 list that are the most predictive, like this is the list right here. This is the ones, these bullet points are the ones I see most commonly with coaches that are let go. So yeah, within the chip stack conversation about expectations related to the program, you think about like when Woody came in, the first like year or two, I mean, he had some chip stack building wins, right? I mean, that North Carolina game at home, where they kind of like smoked Carolina, even though they didn't turn out to be that great a team, but I mean,
they were still one in the country. They were still, and Hubert Davis is on the hot seat now too, I might add.
Yes, exactly. For many of the same reasons that are on this
Mike
list.
Woodson is, yeah.
Yeah, they had that. They swept Purdue at home, or they swept Purdue, and including a win at Mackey. That was pretty convincing. I mean, Woody had what you would call chip stack building wins that are the kind of things you would need to see for a coach to have some longevity at the program, to build the quote unquote momentum, like we talked about prior episode, that you need to have some success going down the road. Problem is, it stopped. I mean, it's like you almost have chapters in the book. It's like there was the chapter in the book where Woody was getting chip stack wins, and you flip the page to the next chapter, and those wins basically dry up.
And chip stack winning seasons, like his first games, that first year where they took care of business against all their early conference. They had some losing streaks that he ended up with winning streaks. Like those last couple of years, at the end of those last couple of years, you could tell there was definitely a better team on the floor. And I'd also argue last year too that they were coming along. It's just they got there slow enough where the winning relative to program expectations is you were a 4 seed 2 years ago. You missed a tournament last year. The year before, the first year you were they were in a play-in game after a long absence from the NCAA tournament for 5 years of not making the tournament.
Right.
So there's a lot of things that you can kind of point to with expectations. And then you go, I know you kind of went in with number 2. It's the underperformance or performing well against program rivals. And, when you sweep Purdue in your second year, after losing to Purdue for what seemed to be 40 years in the wilderness, especially a Purdue team that's number 1 in the country, or that was a top 2% team.
Yeah.
Though, and you did it not at home and on the road when you had the Carolina game, for example. Yeah, there were concerns when you played Arizona. There were concerns when you played Kansas. At Kansas, there were some concerning games, or even the Miami game in the tournament at the end that it ended up where they just kind of extended the lead and beat them.
Yeah.
But that underperformance to program rivals last year was a bit of a problem because you also had it wasn't like Archie Miller where you lose your first game to Indiana State by 20 points.
Yeah.
But you're looking at the rivalries and those types of issues where it wasn't good.
You know what the biggest variable in that number 2 is last year, right? It was the final
right.
4 visit.
Yeah.
When we talk about, and again, we'll talk about expectations, down the road.
Right.
Fans, there's a variety of factors that fans set their program expectations based upon. There's, it's things like program stature, program resources, individual personality of the individual fans. Are they optimistic, pessimistic? Are they the cheerleader type fans, or are they analytical, critical type of fans? But a big one is, where do you want to sit relative to your rivals? Do you see yourself as the big brother, or are you the little brother? And if you see yourself as a big brother in the rivalry and your little brother just went to the national championship game, then you're going to be very upset about your relative stature versus your little brother if they're going to the championship game and you're not even making the tournament. That and in the research, not even the research that I've done personally, but that there has been research on college football, college basketball about coaching tenures that states that one of the biggest hinge variables that exist that determines whether a coach stays or goes is the whole issue around the rivalry. Are they above, at, or below the level of the rivals?
Right.
And obviously right now with what Matt Painter's doing, the bar is obviously set pretty high now. And
take into account what's happening south of the river, where you've had a coaching change at both Louisville and Kentucky in the same year, which I can't remember where that's ever happened.
Yeah, exactly.
You lose to Louisville and Atlantis by 20 plus points. They're still showing signs of being good. And Kentucky's definitely a top 5% team, maybe top 2%.
Yeah. And complicate the fact that you actually played that Louisville team.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You lose to that Louisville team when they made a coaching move at the end of last season.
Yeah.
And
both programs, they're in year 1 and you're in year 4.
Both, and take year 1, year 4 out, when you put up the rationale that you're young and they're young, that you're a new team and they're a new team. They're trying to figure each other out. You're trying to figure each other out.
Yeah.
And both of those teams have been completely upended. Like, there's nobody. Did anybody really return on either one of those two rosters of note at Louisville or Kentucky?
Really, I think the kid from, I think the shooter for Kentucky returned, but most of it was portal plus, some incoming high school kids. And Louisville was gutted. So
Louisville was gutted. So and so now it's like, take rival to contemporaries. I mean, call Louisville, call Kentucky geographic rivals.
Yeah.
And that just, I think, kind of factors into this conversation that, it's going to take us a while to figure this out. Well, we have evidence down here that says otherwise.
Yeah.
And then you throw up another rivalry with Dusty May is coming up and walks right into Michigan.
Yeah.
Similar scenario.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's got more of a nucleus, I think, of what was there. But he's going in there and he's turned them into a top 5% program.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I would say that there's one caveat that you could throw in there for certain coaches. If a coach came in and said, look, I'm going to have to revamp this roster. You're going to have to give me time because I'm going to use almost exclusively high school kids. I'm going to build a high school recruiting based model. So contingent with that is that, it's going to be like 3 years before I have like a stable set of juniors that can actually compete at a top level. Obviously with Indiana, that wasn't the deal.
No.
If you're going in and using almost seemingly exclusively, not totally, obviously you're still using sort of the late high school kids you can add. But if you're going, let's say, majority portal, then your ability to claim that, okay, I need more time really kind of goes out the door, because the number one presumed benefit of the portal is the fact that, well, those kids are juniors already when you're bringing them in. Typically, they're experienced players, so the ramp up opportunity is just completely different versus high school.
Yeah, and that's and I think that 3-year conversation is no longer, because before we go on number 3 next real quick here, but Curt Cignetti also kind of showed that you can flip it around real fast.
Yeah, at a school with less, where the team has less prestige and resources.
I would propose an amendment to program rivals / end contemporaries.
Yeah, no, that's good, Bob. Yeah, I will amend the the write-up,
the resolution to read. Okay.
Yeah.
An erosion of trust and engagement with the local coaching AAU networks. Could you argue that maybe there wasn't a whole lot of engagement from the get-go?
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, and when I was talking about this list with somebody, and they were saying, well, one of our friends in the network said, God, it seems like Woody was checking off some of these boxes right away. And that's true. I mean, typically the first 2 that you see a coach check off on this list, it's usually like some kind of recruiting regression, but maybe most importantly, the lack of engagement with local coaching networks. And that's usually just like kind of an either or. The coach just decides like, yeah, I'm going to be engaged with these guys, or now I don't need to worry about that. But it's more, not even so much the engagement, but it's like the perception within those groups. So it's like, okay, what do they think about that coach? Like, yeah, that's like, even if they're maybe not making house calls to them, it's like, would I send my kid to that place based upon what I think that coach can do for my players?
Well, the other thing is, if you know a high school or AAU coach in the area, ask them if they have Mike Woodson's phone number, and then ask them if they have Matt Painter and Micah Shrewsbury's phone number.
Yeah, and how many text messages they've received from either.
Ask them how much Greg Tonigal reaches out to them versus anybody from IU.
Yeah,
and that, which then again, number 4, the non-temporary decline in home game attendance and ticket sales. Are we noticing that?
Just, I think the cavernous echoes you hear at Assembly Hall during some games is probably testament to that.
And we'll get to the social media here in a second, but I know that seeing the students pour out to go to upstairs after halftime of a game, I don't ever remember seeing that.
Yeah. Well, if I were leaving a game at Assembly Hall in the middle of winter and I was pissed off, I would absolutely go to the upstairs pub. That'd be number 1 place to go.
I think I would agree.
And we're going to be there in like go 3 weeks anyway. So yeah.
Right. We will be there. And, but yeah, let's look at the non-temporary decline here. Let's look at some other factors, but observable, so the traction with high impact recruits, both nationally and especially locally. I think you could argue last year the national recruiting kind of fell not apart. Okay, you know what? Over 31 with the guards.
Yeah,
that's not
over 10 on your official visits. Yeah, that's collapse.
No bueno. And then this year, though, part of the get right was you had Sicily, Harrelson, and Mullins.
Yeah,
and Sicily's coming, but the other two. And you didn't have anybody. I mean, locally, those were 3 guys that had IU put in 3 years. Theoretically, that's a Cheney type class. That's a right. No,
that it's the funny thing. Like we talk whenever we see these recruiting issues within one class. What's always the sort of mantra that happens in the whole debate? You lose out on this class. Don't worry. Next year is going to be awesome. It's sort of like the Wimpy from Popeye theory. Is that I know I don't have it for you today,
but I'll have it Tuesday.
Recruits are coming on Tuesday of next year.
And that leads to 6, an increase in the frequency of media reports concerning the coach's longevity. My YouTube feed was interesting with national voices. I'm noticing some of a lot of the Twitter even program Twitter groups are kind of saying certain things. The private messages I get, I'm sure you get, and all our friends get, and the media reports. But it's like, just hearing that Trilly Donovan, if you're on his site. I think reading a Peaks board or the Substack for Assembly Call or inside the locker room, Bloomingtown, B-Town banners, wherever you're getting, like whatever groups you're into. If you're listening to Chad Schwarzkopf, if you're listening to more of us on the Back Home Network, it doesn't matter where you're getting the info from. If you're listening to Dockage, you're hearing this.
Yeah, whether you agree with it or not, always.
Whether you agree, you're just hearing. It's now a debate.
Yeah,
and not even really a debate. It's more like a the question of impending doom seems to be sitting over. You're now in the place where you don't want to be, where the storm clouds are showing, and it's like the snowstorm's blowing in. Like, when is the blizzard going to hit?
Right.
June into 11. So,
it's interesting. I did some digging like a few years ago on this very question. It's one of the reasons that appears in this list. I could not find any cases of coaches where they appeared on the hot seat list from more than one source for some extended period of time, like a few months, and then they were coaching at that same school like 2 years later. It's just like, it's not so much the fact that it's written that causes the coach to go. It's the fact that obviously once you are one of the 300 whatever coaches that's out in college basketball, and that you actually are getting noticed to the point where you're on a small, tight little list, then that's indicative of something, that your program is not in good shape.
Well, because I think a lot of it is when you get the hot seat thing, those first 5 are what gets you on the hot seat, right? Initially. Yeah. I mean, we what I love about the way, Mike, you've set this list up is that you have these 5 very measurable things at the top, and then you have the perception things of, okay, so if this, then this, if this, then this. So if you get these 5 and you start seeing noticeable downward trends or rapid plummets in those 5, then 6 through 10 are going to happen.
Right.
It's almost like cause and effect.
Yeah. It's a continuation of our conversation in the last pod. You remember we're talking about how momentum works in coaching tenures in college basketball. And I put up a slide where I put like all the people that are involved in college basketball, like the quote unquote actors, where it's like, the coach, the media, the donors, the message boards fans, the local AAU networks. And I had like all of these, like, it looked like something out of A Beautiful Mind. Those like little string connections, like everyone was connected to someone on the whiteboard in terms of reacting to each other's behavior. Once the media sees the team and the fans behave a particular way, then they react. But then other actors see the media react, and then they change their behavior. That's basically what's kind of written here is that actions happen, then people react to that, and then other people react to those reactions, and it just causes the this kind of building of the rock slide when it comes to the coach. And so everything does kind of look like momentum. And once it goes in a bad direction, then obviously, as I've said before, it is very hard to recover once you're at that stage.
Which again also gets fueled by the 3-to-1 or greater negative message ratio, the ratio of negative to positive, of supportive versus non-supportive, I guess you would say.
Yeah, like me. Yeah, I would say like it's 3-to-1 ratio of negative comments, relative to the positive or neutral comments on social media. Once you cross that Rubicon for, let's say, a few weeks, it's very difficult to like get it back. Let's say under 3-to-1.
My favorite is you go through a Facebook post or you go TwitX. I call it TwitX because it's just, I don't know what to call it, but this sort of world where you look at a reply and like you might see something about, weather in Indiana is going to be this. Mm. Well, Mike Woodson's going to, if it's any colder than what Mike Woodson's got going on here, it's when you start noticing that it's like how new concert schedule announced for Deer Creek. It's like, and you just see it and you're like, okay, yeah, this is everybody's. It's the equivalent of spray painting, fire, impeach Nixon on subway walls in the 1974. It's the same sort of mindset where that kind of goes into the conversation of, people are wanting to be heard on this, and you look at that. And again, I think staffs noticed that too. I think what's unique about this group is that they have very much stayed together with some notable exceptions. Yeah. I mean, it's not like like with Archie, you kind of could tell, I think he had almost 100% turnover in his coaching staff. I mean, almost. Yeah. Yeah. There definitely seemed to be more of a transactional relationship. Mike Davis was a constant, like he had a revolving door, and did assistants in, assistants out, assistants in, assistants out. Yeah. This group, it definitely has a feel to it. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to go there, but you know exactly where I'm going, where they're all together in one place, right? While the Russians are coming in. Yeah, exactly. It has a feel of that, exactly. And the Winter Palace is getting a little louder on the outside. That's another one too. That's a really good one as well. It's but the players have been interesting too, because every team has churn. Right. Every team has churn. It's just, I think the churn at IU just feels different, only because these were the guys that we kind of said they need to jump up. Like Tamar Bates was an example of that, or a CJ Gunn was an example of that. Yeah. Where that it was a key individual that if they develop, they can definitely reach more their ceiling. Right. And then they're the one on the way out. And I mean, you could say, Tamar's been doing decently well at Missouri. I think CJ's coming along very well at DePaul. Yeah. Caleb Banks is definitely a good example of that. Yeah, he's doing really well. How's Jordan Geronimo doing at Maryland this year? Is he actually is not doing? I think that because the roster changes, Jordan's not getting nearly as much, and Derek Queen is kind of like gobbling up a lot of the forward and center activity, let's say. And now you also have the decommit of Liam McNeely and some of kind of his thing too. You can kind of put that in a high impact recruit miss, but you had him for a while. He left you, and now he's at UConn doing the things that he's doing and saying the things that he's saying, and that I think that it's at the very least it's attracted some attention there. Sure. We're catching some of the leaks. I think we definitely caught some of that in Atlantis. We caught some of that. Right at the end of the calendar year with and that sort of stuff. It's like, oh, you expect college students not to go out to bars, but it's when things are going well. When things are going well to program, and again, this is like number 9 on the list, but the increase in negative leaks about
the behind the scenes workings of the program, what you typically notice is that if a program is doing pretty well, there is, I won't say there's no omerta or conspiracy of silence per se, but people just they kind of give things the benefit of the doubt when they see something, or especially in the social media world where everyone has a camera on their phone and they can go right to social media and say, oh, look what I saw. So when a program is doing well, you just don't get a lot of that. People just kind of take the pictures like, oh, cool, I saw this player at this place. Or just the fact of you get, let's say, some scuttlebutt that happens about a program. And believe me, even at the top times of like Villanova, that I hear out here during the Jay Wright era, there was like always some stories that are coming out like, oh yeah, I kind of heard about, like this player is having this kind of problem. But for the most part, it just didn't like gain any traction because, oh man, we're going to the Final Four. People overlook things when you're winning. They don't when you're losing.
Didn't Auburn actually have to turn a flight around because they had a fist fight or some sort of altercation between players in the airplane?
Yes, they did.
There were some IU fans that commented about that.
Right. No, I mean,
but it happens.
The difference is that most things that happen, let's say that could be leaked within a program, don't involve the FAA or FAA news reports that come out. Most of them are just like very common things that no one really sees except you and your phone.
But number one in the country, after a while, have we heard about it since? Have we heard about chemistry problems at Auburn?
Not really, no.
No. So again, it's a matter of those leaks continue. Like when it gets leaked, it doesn't linger. Does it kind of stick around and stick to the bottom of your shoe?
It's not the leak. It's not the content of the leak. It's the fact that people feel comfortable enough to leak it in the first place because it signals something else about what's going on in the program. Right.
So that leads us to 10. I think we've heard it. I think there's been conversation. I mean, it was very visible in the last home game,
and audible,
and audible.
Yeah. Number 10 being booing.
Certain chants.
I put on my research. I see both booing and I put on their negative signage. I don't know. Is signage really allowed?
I don't know.
Did they put a kibosh on that assembly hall?
Honestly, I don't even know. But I think I think generally you're talking about it. Generally if you're talking about a thing of like, he's got to go, sort of thing, or this sort of these sorts of areas. I'm not going to get into the should you not. Regardless, I think from the way I look at it, I think the way you look at it, Mike, it's an indicator.
Yeah. Well, of all the indicators on this list, booing is the most predictive of the end stage. Coaches.
If your student section is basically turning its back and walking out in a program like this and doing what they did the last game, is it kind of like when the regulars in the Russian army joined the protesters in the streets and went to the Tsar's palace?
Exactly. It's that scene in Dr. Zhivago where where that captain gets blown off his horse. And it's like, okay, now the soldiers are marching the other way.
Yeah, that's what we're kind of talking about here, and I think we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to wrap this up here probably the next 5 minutes. But we're going to kind of just go through quickly for us, doing kind of where, not where it's going to go, but just kind of survival skills for the coming days, weeks, and maybe a couple months.
Next on X's and Joes. Welcome back to X's and Joes. I'm Mike Wiemuth, joined by Coach Bob Moats. So, Bob, we kind of went through, I guess, the diagnostic, let's say the current diagnostic on where things stand with the program.
As I've said,
so what are your 30,000 foot thoughts at this moment?
As I've said to everybody, on, off, whatever, and this is, we did kind of more of a Beatles theme because I was kind of feeling it. Plus, I was spending a couple of days with you out there, knowing how your family feels about the Beatles.
Yeah,
but more than that,
son especially,
your son especially. But anytime you feel the pain, refrain and whisper words of wisdom. Let it be.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing anybody is going to do at this point is going to either turn it around rapid 180. Nobody outside of the program, I should say, is going to turn around any of this 180, or is going to result in whatever end, whenever it ends, is going to happen. And so I think root for them, root against them. I get it. Either way, I get why somebody would take that long-standing view. I'm going to be happy I'm going to be happy if the program wins.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, at the very least, because kids like Trey Galloway, especially Anthony Leal, especially,
right,
deserve to have this not be a completely horrible experience where the thing just throttles right square into the ground in a screaming thing of terror.
Yeah,
if that's where it goes. Which again, at this point, make your own decision. I guess is where I'm going.
Yeah,
but from 30,000 feet, there's indicators out there, and the thing is that the damage has been done.
Mm-hmm.
And now the question is, can you do that sort of miraculous parting of the Red Sea and see where that's always possible? We're not going to say it isn't, but I think you and I are going to have kind of changed our approach a little bit just to respond to events, dear boy events, because we needed to do it. We needed to say, okay, there's a reason. And there's a reason why we've been talking about the things we're talking about. It's like, watch this, not this, or watch this, not while watching that.
Yeah.
Understanding what people are talking about, what the criticisms or the supports are for this.
Right.
And regardless, next year is next year. April 1st is April 1st. It's a long way to Tipperary, but it's a long and winding road. We'll go back to the Beatles thing where we started the show with that. But whether it's Hey Jude, it's not going to be so bad, and Let It Be. I don't know. I think that's just my view on it.
Yeah.
It's you at this point, events are in motion, and the question is just, it's almost like a when, where, how.
Yeah.
And I will just say this: it's like saying, well, our record is, or we can make the tournament. There could be a North Carolina State scenario here. That is in play.
Yeah. Yeah, if they went to the Final Four, that would change things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so and honestly, root like hell for it. You know what? Hey, if being we haven't been to one since 2001, 2002.
Yeah.
Why not? Okay, but it's just I know, but I could also again realistically say it's really hard to see.
Yeah. Like I said before in prior episodes, it's that which is possible is not always probable. Probabilities and possibilities are two different things. So
if that were the case, every time I buy a lottery ticket, I'd be flying private.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're right, Bob. I think that's a good attitude to take. I think, and it's one I always sort of suggest for fans. It's like, look, these things are beyond your control. How you react to them is obviously within your control. How you personally set your own. I mean, there's a difference between program expectations and like your own personal expectations. Like, and you can set those accordingly in terms of, okay, I may know that my team is not where I want it to be, but I'm going to react in maybe a certain way that maybe doesn't cause more issues than are necessary. And I think what we try to do on this show, and I think one of the reasons we did the show, we started about a year ago. I mean, we started December of 23. The reason we kind of went through all of the, let's say the foundational pods around the chip stack, around how momentum works, around how programs build success, build momentum, all those sort of things that we went through. The reason, and talking about the honeymoon, especially the reason we did those is because we're trying to give fans a sense of like, this is how the mechanics of college basketball work within a program that allows them to succeed or fail. And so what we try to do here, and it's obviously why we talked about today, the honeymoon, the chip stack and all that, is because it relates all the research that we've talked about before that guides whether programs and coaches make it or not. And so I think what we'll continue to do is just always tether the conversations about the present to the historical data of the past. And I hope we're able to do that today, talking about this is why we're in this situation. This is the driving factors of what typically pushes coaches into this situation and why the fans react to it in that way. So yeah, we will certainly continue to do that in the coming weeks, and obviously, we'll track things as they go, as events, as we say. And if it does come to the let's say what was the last track on Abbey Road, Bob? Do you remember?
And in the end, actually, the last unofficial track was
it the Queen thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Her Majesty.
Oh, that's
but
right.
The last one,
yeah.
And in the end. Yeah. And in the end, the love you make is, or the love you take is equal to the love you make.
Exactly. And it was called, literally the title is The End.
The End.
So we may, so if events change and there's something that happens within the program that's obviously that will alter, let's say, the future of the staff, we will certainly come by and have a conversation about that. But
we'll always be intellectually honest.
Exactly. And before we go, we don't want to leave things on, let's say, a totally negative bend. I wanted to give people at least some bit of a mini slideshow of Bob's visit to Philadelphia.
It will be in the show notes.
Yeah, we will. Yeah, we'll definitely put these in the show notes. But Bob, why don't you walk us through some of these pictures, particularly this one?
That is an official Philly cheesesteak. And no, you don't need the chips, you don't need the fries, you don't need the onion rings. What was the place again? Help me with that. And we were there. Go ahead.
It's called Jim's on South Street. It's
Jim's on South Street, which actually looked more like Dagwoods by the time we got in there, because there were a bunch of IU fans there because the Eagles game hadn't let out yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a cheesesteak with whiz, onion. I mean, whiz and onions, I believe, and mushrooms.
Whiz, onions, and mushrooms.
Right.
And the way you would order that is whiz with mushrooms.
Whiz with mushrooms. And I'm sorry, I'm a Midwesterner. I'm going to sound like a foreigner there. We do have an accent.
Yeah, wit equals onions, just so people know.
Yeah. Got it. Whiz with mushrooms. Okay, we can. Yeah. Okay. Remember that. Look at that thing. And yeah, I mean,
look at the close up on that thing. That thing looks
don't. I mean, I'm actually getting hungry just looking at it. We're talking about ordering Jimmy John's here in a minute. It just feels like it just feels like I'm betraying amazing. There's a reason why it's like if you order a Philly cheesesteak anywhere else in the country, it's not close. It's not this.
Yeah, you've heard of the South Beach diet. This is the South Street diet. So, and
I'm all for it. Yeah. So moving on from the Jim's sandwich.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like I had a friend that came in. It was about like a year or two ago, and he opened this sandwich and he saw what you saw, and he asked okay, God, how many calories is this?
Don't ask.
Yeah, I think I was like, man, like I think I responded. I said about 300 per inch.
Per inch,
maybe per bite. But yeah, it's about that. Yeah.
If you have to ask, just don't eat it.
Exactly.
It's like there's a place close by with a salad.
Exactly.
This is the Palestra. I mean, this actually looks like it looks like a lot of the old gyms I've coached in. Like when you're coaching kids and youth, kind of that youth level, and you end up in an old middle school or an old high school gymnasium. it's an intimate. So yeah, and those, Mike, again, just thanks again. It was a killer trip.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, it was fun. It was fun having you. I would say I like having you, sort of like in earshot when a game is going on, because again, I'm more the analytical person. I can watch game on a tape because like I have to slow things down to say, okay, yeah, they were running zoom action there, or they were doing floppy or whatever. What I like about you is like you're much better at like seeing it like in real time and before it happens. Like for me, I do have to kind of slow things down on tapes. Like, oh, okay, yeah, that's what they're doing. So yeah, that's it's always fun for me to do that with you in attendance. So.
And always fun to have you kind of sit, sitting there just kind of going, yeah, see what I mean with the wiggle on this player, or seeing what I'm seeing with just how this team kind of functions from a roster development standpoint.
Yeah,
it's always fun. Just it's honestly, if we could ever do a game,
yeah.
I mean. At this point,
we would clean it up. I mean, we're not profane or anything, but we certainly get into a lot of obscure jokes and things like that.
Mike, you're not profane. You're not. There's somebody else in this conversation that knows George Carlin's 7 words and likes most of them and can't use them most days. So it's like poor Mike. It's like he's got the sailor sitting next to him.
You were not nearly as bad as Coach Rhodes. We were within earshot of him, and a few of those calls during the Penn State game.
That the last final, I think the last foul call that his guy had on Omako.
Yeah,
and he just kind of threw his hands up and said,
"Yeah, exactly. He was done.
Forget it, as you would say if your kids are listening."
Yep.
So speaking of listening, thank you to Bob Thompson for the music and the sound of this show. And special thanks to John Rigger of rigdesign.com for designing our logo and look of the show. We're hoping to see them in 2 weeks.
I think it's 3 weeks from now.
3 weeks from now at the Back Home Assembly Call.
Back Home Network. Yeah, reunion.
Whatever. It's a meetup. The meetup's coming. So if you have a chance to see Dusty May come into the Assembly Hall to play your Hoosiers, and there'll be more details coming on that one. And we'll hopefully have another show on expectations before then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, for right now, episode 24, which was supposed to be the one we were going to have today. We're planning on having a conversation about program expectations. Jared Morris had agreed to hop on that show with us, and we still expect that will happen. When that will take place, maybe 2 weeks from now. We're still going to have to feel things out. Who knows what's going to happen the next 2 weeks? So I would say that our scheduling has become a little bit more flexible and open to variation than we usually are accustomed to.
I would say this. I think I made this reference to you, Mike, off, and I'll just say, if you're on the Titanic and you have a choice, you can stand on the deck and listen to the band, you can cry, or you go to the first class lounge and break into Astor's Humidor, find the really good scotch. Yeah. And just wait it out.
Exactly.
Just wait it out.
Exactly. It's warmer inside.
It's a lot warmer inside
for now.
and if security comes in and says you can't do this, just offer him a drink and a cigar. I'm sure at this point they'll be like, you know what?
Yeah, exactly.
Forget it.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
So look for that. So we'll be shooting for to record that episode probably in about 2 weeks. So until then, this Endless Conversation was brought to you by the Back Home Network. Be sure to check out all the great BHN content, including Assembly Call, Doing the Work, Right at Meridian, The Drill Drive, and Crimson Cast on YouTube and backhomenetwork.com. So until next time, I'm Mike Wiemuth.
I'm Bob Moats.
Take care, everybody. Have a good one. Stay warm.
Yeah, stay warm and dry.